Good afternoon to you all. And I'm very happy to be with you today and to talk to you about trends in people analytics. I'm sitting in the Netherlands in my little cubicle. Well, I assume most of you are somewhere in India, but maybe elsewhere in the world. As Swati said, if you have any questions during my presentation, please post them in the chat box. At the end of the session, there will be ample time for Q&A as well. If there's no time left for your question, by all means, send me your questions via email or any other medium. My background, as said, my background is in international human resource management. So I've worked around the world for companies. You see there, in 2014, I founded the HR Trend Institute. And at the HR Trend Institute, we are trend watchers in the domain of people and organization. So we try to follow the trends, we write about the trends, and we talk about the trends in sessions as today. And I must say, it's very fortunate that there's a big interest in India in these type of developments. If we look at our newsletter and if we look at the people who read our blog posts, to be honest, India is the second country on the list. USA #1, India #2, UK number 3. So of course, English-speaking countries. You also see that the Museum of HR. I won't talk about that today, but that's a nice little venture capturing all kinds of historical elements of human resource management. And I want to start today with a couple of examples. So I give you 4 or 5 examples, little stories that I see, that I have seen, and then I will lead you through some of the important trends in people analytics as I see them at this moment. And at the end, there will be Q&A time. So example number 1. This is an example of a financial institution, a bank. And in this bank, they use an instrument, a tool that is provided by a company that is called KeenCorp, K-E-E-N-C-O-R-P. If I mention any companies, and I will mention more companies in this presentation, I have no interest whatsoever in any company. So there's no hidden advertisements here. I just mention companies because I like them. So this financial institution uses KeenCorp, and KeenCorp is a tool that you give access to the emails in the organization. So you give KeenCorp access, they start to process and analyze the emails, and then after a while, generally not too long, they are able to do a couple of things. One is real-time measurement of engagement. So based on their analysis of the emails, they can say to the organization, where is engagement at this moment good, where is it lower, where do we have issues. So real-time engagement measurement. Secondly, I've seen it used also for risk management, especially in financial institutions, that's important, but also in other organizations. So based on their analysis, they can say, hey, where, in which teams, in which departments in the organization do we have risks? And there's an interesting case study that is also available online, where they looked at the emails of the Enron Corporation. You might remember Enron, US company, many years ago, and they went bankrupt, partly because of fraudulent management. So they put 5 years emails of Enron in the machine, and then you could see, if you looked at what they call the KeenCorp index, that the index went became low a lot earlier than the actual crisis was detected. So real-time engagement, real-time risk management, and I've also seen data where it's used to kind of predict that there are risks in the area of health and safety, especially in the current situation, important, but generally, for example, companies in construction, companies in oil and gas, health and safety is important. And if you can detect indicators that you might have a risk going forward, that's very important for those type of companies. And if management and if employees don't have their eye on the ball, the risks of accidents increase. So good illustration of fast measurement, real-time measurement, instead of, let's say, slow type of detection. The second example is an example from a police force. You see on the picture, you see a policeman, probably an American policeman. Many policemen, but also people in other professions, more and more wearables are used. Also relevant in the context of people analytics, because the wearables are used to gather data, in a sense, you could say. In this example, the policeman does not only have a body cam, as you see on the picture, but also an Apple type watch of device. And through this device, the agitation level of the police man is, or yeah, I think it's a man probably, of the policeman is measured. So when he is called to a crime scene, he might rush to a crime scene, but when his agitation level is too high, he gets a little gentle buzz from his device saying, hey, if I was the policeman, hey, Tom, your agitation level is too high. And, well, stop. Because if you enter now, you can't be very effective. So sometimes even the moment of reflection is already enough. I think, oh, yes, wind down. If not, then I can call a colleague or somebody else. So helping people to do their work better through direct measurement, direct processing, and giving them kind of instant feedback, that's a very promising area, not only for people in police forces, but also elsewhere. Example number 3 is an example in the area of what we call prescriptive analytics. And prescriptive analytics basically is the domain where you say we have analyzed data, and we have drawn conclusions, and we use our analysis to prescribe how people best behave. So we prescribe it. And this example is in a call center for emergency calling in the Netherlands. That number is 112. So if you dial 112, the people in the call center receive your call. The people in those call centers work according to protocols. So prescriptive analytics, they have to follow a protocol that appears on their screen, and that is, you could say, pushed by the responses of the people who answer the phone and who are on the phone. So I've seen a documentary where they follow a couple of people in such a call center, and it's very interesting. There's one person that really, you could say, loves working in this mode. She says, I love it because I only have to follow the protocol. My life has become easier. I cannot easily make mistakes. I know that when I follow the protocol, that generally the interventions we do are most effective. There's another person that is an old hand, and she works there a long time, and she hates it. She hates it. She says, oh, sometimes I'm pushed into this protocol, but I can be quicker. I know exactly what to do. But, and interesting in this documentary, this lady is nearly fired because you have to follow the protocol. But and you can imagine that it's not suited for everybody. There are people who love it. There are people who don't like it, especially prima donna type of people. And many sports teams these days work according to these type of protocols, but especially also in those sports teams. My sport is football. Prima donnas, they say, well, I know better. Yeah, maybe for top teams that works, but for most teams, working according to protocol is the way forward. And in many organizations, these type of elements will become more important if we talk about prescriptive analytics. The fourth example is an example from a hospital where they use micro-learning. And I'm sure you know the difference between micro-learning and macro-learning. Macro-learning is learning something, you could say, totally new, often not on the job. Often macro-learning is in classroom type of sessions, be it online or in real classrooms. Micro-learning is more getting close to the work of people and offering them small learning solutions that are useful for them at that moment in time. So there are a couple of elements here that are important. In this example, in this hospital, what they do, if I'm a nurse in a hospital, I'm on my way to assist in an operation, and my calendar knows my schedule. So my calendar knows it's 5 to 9, and at 9 o'clock, Tom is going to assist in a gallbladder operation. So at 5 to 9, I get on my smartphone a little test. And I get, let's say, 10 questions about the operation. I answer the questions. If I pass, the smartphone says, "Good luck, Tom. Wash your hands and go to the operation." If it's a little bit more dubious, then I get a little video, couple of minutes, with the essentials of the operation. So repeating to me the essentials of that operation. Interesting. The concept is often called something like learning in the flow of work. Going forward in the whole HR domain, that is an important concept. Learning in the flow of work. How can we get close to the actual work of people? How can we analyze what they're doing? How can we compare what they are doing to probably best in class, or how it should be if it is a protocol comparison? And then based on that gap analysis, offer them appropriate guidance or micro-learning solutions. Not easy, but you can imagine if you let your fantasy going, that there are numerous opportunities to use these type of concepts and increase the impact of learning enormously. I go to example number five. This is a recent example, and it has to do with, you could say, the concept of personalization. I probably will talk about it a little bit more later, and the concept of segmentation. In the end, personalization is also an important trend and concept in HR, and very important going forward. And personalization has to do with, are you willing and able as an organization to tailor what you do, taking the individual preferences and needs and wishes and capabilities of people into account? And often that's not so easy. This is recent research of a company here in the Netherlands, Cruncher. They are in people analytics. They did it together with a couple of companies, and they investigated in the last weeks people who work remotely at home. And so they asked the people, which type of thing do you need to work in the best possible way out of home? And well, in the Netherlands and in many other countries, and I'm sure also in India, today many people work out of home. So they asked, what do you need to improve the way you work at home. And you probably, the letters are too small, but people could choose of a list of things. And on the left side, you see the elements that on average rated highest. Highest is collaboration tools. You can imagine, like we are using Zoom today. Flexible working hours is number 2 on the list. Social interaction, updates from my manager, work supplies. Well, I won't read them all. On the bottom is paid time off, mental support, and do good for society. So there is a ranking. That's in itself already interesting, but it's more interesting, and generally that's a good guidance in any people analytics project, to dig deeper. Dig deeper. So if you look, and I've just taken 2 examples out of the research, if you look how people answer the questions, and for example, on flexible working hours, well, there are people who find that very important, but there are also people who say, well, yeah, flexible working hours, that's for me not high on my list. Collaboration tools, for some people, they say that is really high on my list. For other people, it is not. So if you do an intelligent analysis, you find differences. You at least can maybe cluster groups of people. There are people with different needs and wishes. If you know that, then you are able to be a lot more focused in the type of interventions and the type of activities you do, directed at those different groups. So no overall one-size-fits-all measures, but more tailored. It won't be probably be possible to make everybody happy, but with a little effort, you can make the fit between needs and what you do a lot better. So I think an excellent example of research done by Cruncher in this case. And the last example I wanted to give you today is also an interesting project by an organization called CAPPER, the Center for Applied Personality, Product and Personality Research, a long name. They developed the Corona coping tool, and you see the URL there, stayhealthy, stayengaged.com. You can go there and do the Corona coping tool. It's a little test based on the Big 5 personality test and based on your answers on the questions. And the test is really very visual and very easy to do in a couple of minutes. You get your profile and you get a kind of recommendations how you are coping in a crisis like we currently have with Corona. I show the example 1 because it might be interesting for all of you to do the test and to see how it can be helpful for you, not only for you, but also for the people who have to work with you. You can say to other people, hey, this is me. If you want to know how to deal with me, these are the recommendations. But it also has to do again with personalization, because if you have these type of data of people, then you can start tailoring your message. Some people, like myself, I'm a little bit, you could say, introvert. I like working alone. So for me, it's not hardship to work in my home and to do things at home and to work alone and sometimes have little contact with other people. But for other people, that's a burden. Their productivity goes down very rapidly if they have no interactions, if they cannot connect to people, etc., etc. So good example, and well, I hope you can experience how it is to do the Corona coping tool. So 6 examples. I'm just checking maybe in the chat box whether everything is okay. Let me see. Well, I think there are no signals there that nobody can hear me or anything. If so, yeah, flag it to me, because of course I would like everybody to clearly understand what I'm saying. So a couple of examples, and already you can see in most of those examples, people analytics, clever use of data plays an important role. What I want to do is take 12 trends I see in the domain of people analytics. It might be 15, it might be 10, but I have for today chosen 10 to discuss and share with you. Number one, I showed you the example of Keen Corp, but that was a good illustration of the movement from slow to fast, from one time to real time. And overall, the concept of speed, especially in, you could say, the HR domain, is important. We have to do things faster and quicker. And in a way, unfortunately, many of our current HR processes and current HR ways of working tend to be slow. But the movement is, how can we do things quicker? And also, how can we do things in a more repetitive way? And I will come back to that later, but overall, HR can learn a lot from marketing. Because if you do things only one time, if you do things super slow, well, it might be helpful one time, but you want to take measures that are kind of continuously. If you work in retail, you know that the people in retail, every night they know how much that we sell, what is not moving, what is moving faster, where are shortages, so that they can act fast on the data and analysis they do. Sometimes when I come in HR, things, well, you know, they have their quarterly dashboards and they look at quarterly dashboards, and yeah, that's not fast enough. But at the same time, I don't see a lot of HR teams, maybe more so in these days, that really at the end of each day sit behind their dashboard and say, hey, what's going on? How is engagement in the different parts of the organization? How is productivity? What is moving? Why are there issues? What should we do? So an important trend on the speed dimension. So I try to graphically put it in people analytics. We have seen in the past many one-time projects. Organization, we need to do something in people analytics. Let's do a project. Often they hired consultants and they like these projects, big project, gathering a lot of data, doing an analysis. Here's the report, ta-da! It's, yeah, often, of course, sometimes results. It can be helpful, but then someone says, yeah, can we also do that in another country, or can we do that in another department? Yeah, that is not so easy, or that will again cost a lot of money. So instead of doing these one-time projects, the movement is to more continuous measurement, continuous data collection, and making sure that based on that continuous collection of data, you can take action. In survey land, and I'm sure of you in your organizations, you do surveys. We know that in the past, it used to be, and I called it here the classic surveying way of employees is once per year or once per 2 years, a big survey, many questions. Most of the time after that, nothing happened. Or the reports appeared so late that people said, yeah, this was 6 months ago, the situation has changed. Most organizations have moved to more regular surveys, shorter surveys, pulse surveys, for example, every month, every quarter, every week. There are organizations that connected more, and I will come back to that as well, to the employee journey, measure important elements in the employee journey. And you could say that the more or less, the one ultimate solution is measuring, finding ways to do it real time. Best in class organizations I see today have a mixture. They don't do just one thing, but they create a listening architecture. I think there's a picture here which I took from Jos Bursen. You will know him. He's one of the gurus in the HR tech arena, and he to illustrate the point I say, he said it's not about one thing. It's you have to create a listening architecture. He calls it a feedback architecture, but other people call it continuous listening. So it's not only a survey, it's connecting other data points, and then out of that array, you are trying to make some conclusions, and not one time, but more or less continuously. Very powerful concept. And data, we talk about speed, so this was still you could say trend, one of the early trends. Things can go a lot faster, also simpler things. For example, this is an example of personality testing. In the past, when you had to test people's personality, they had to fill in a long questionnaire, 90 questions, 100 questions. Today, there are numerous tools. This is one example powered by IBM, that in this machine, you just copy paste text that someone has written, you put it in the machine, and out comes the big 5 personality profile of that person. I've tested it a couple of times. I write a blog post, so I copy and paste blog post, and I also did the test in the traditional way, and the commonality was 95%, surprisingly, because if you read my blog posts, they are not super personal. They're just about the things I talk about today. So data collection, when we talk about speed, can be a lot faster. Some other examples, Cameo, video interviewing is also very important, even more important in these days when remote recruiting, you could say, is becoming the standard. There are tools like HireVue, Cameo, that also are able to quickly analyze the results of video interviewing, not only looking at the content of your answers, but also at the use of your voice, and in some instances also your facial movements. Reliability, maybe not perfect yet, but these type of instruments are improving every day, and so in that way we are also able to quickly analyze results from video interviews a lot quicker than we did in the past. Also, speed. I talked about moving from one time to continuous project. I already mentioned Cruncher. There are other solutions. Vigier is one. There are good tools that enable you to collect data from different sources, and then I don't know what the right expression in English is, but analyze the data and make really valuable conclusions out of that. And then you could say not all the data needs to be super perfect. There's a first check how perfect the data. If it's not perfect, we might infer some of the conclusions. So also there, it's not, if you strive for perfection, yeah, you might lose a lot of time, and speed is super important, specifically in the analytics area. Speed, this is an example I also like, and it's used a lot in call centers these days. It's basically when you call a call center, there is software that generally tries to find out who you are. So sometimes you have to type in a number, then exactly you are. But for example, if you call for the 10th time, then the software says, if a complainer calls, then the software starts to look in the call center for the people in the center who are best at handling complainers, and so that they direct the complainer in that direction. So this is also, you could say, in a sense, an example of a real-time people analytics, because this goes instantly, but you have to continuously track what's going on, because how do you know who are good in dealing with complainers. You have to analyze calls, you have to look at the net promoter scores of the people who call. So, and you have to continuously make sure your data is updated and relevant and checked to your actions instantly. And it can also be used probably in HR call center. So number one trend was about speed. And I look at the time, I think we're good on track. Number two, I won't spend too much time on it, but you can always have a discussion. What is it called? Is it HR analytics? Is it people analytics? Is it workforce analytics? I see more and more it's about workforce analytics because, yes, of course, the workforce is people, but not, it used to be horses here. In the past, it used to be horses, but today we also have chatbots in the workforce. We have robots in the, and of course, we have many people in the workforce, but also those people, yeah, where are they? It's not only about the people on the payroll, it's also about the wider workforce. It's the people who are contributing to the organization. That might be the flexible workforce, that might be people who have worked for us, it might be candidates that are not yet working for us. So it pays off to have a wide definition of, you could say, the workforce. And then even the word workforce might not be good enough because some people might not be working yet for you. But message here, try to be inclusive and try to look at different elements and different parts of the workforce in a clever way. For example, looking at the engagement of people in your flexible workforce is also important because you might not need them at this moment, but are they willing to work for you at the moment when you need them? Question mark. You better see how that is working. So two trends, speed and you could say look at the more inclusive workforce. Number three has to do with transparency. Also clear. We should not do things secretly. And there are all kinds of laws and regulations that help us to keep the right track, but it is an important subject. And it's easy to talk about data collection and analyzing data, but keep in mind that privacy laws, but also having respect for the individuals in the organization is an important element. And are we, can we do things? Analyzing faces is easy today. I showed you the examples early, but if you can analyze my face at this moment, put it in a computer and tell me something about my personality and tell me something about my engagement and what have you. I cannot stop it, but if I was your employee, I certainly would not like it. And if afterwards you come to me and said, hey, Tom, we have analyzed your behavior in this video call, and here are some elements, some recommendations for you. Well, I don't know. We should be very careful around that. So here you see me analyzed by one of the early facial recognition machines. They were not perfect in those days. You see that this machine says my age is between, yeah, it's 51 plus or minus 13. Yeah, that's true. I'm a male, and it also says I'm happy. Well, that's not so difficult for software to detect that. The crucial element here is what we see today in many people analytics efforts is that there's a lot of focus on the organizational needs and the organizational objectives, but the question is, what is in it for the employees? What is in it for the candidates? Do they benefit as well? And in my view, that often should be one of the first questions on the list. What are the benefits for the employees? Difficult. And it has to do, of course, also with trust. You see it on the picture. If everybody trusts each other and the level of trust in organization is high, it's less of an issue. But if trust levels are not so high, you can design all kinds of fancy projects, but then people will say, I don't know. What are they going to do with all that data they collect? There is an interesting a company, Edelman, and they annually publish what they call the Edelman Trust Barometer. The last version is 2020, but it's pre-corona, so probably they are doing research at this moment to see how it is changing. Well, there's a lot of interesting data in that report. It's online available if you go to edelman.com. And I just took out a couple of pictures. But how much do you trust these people to do what is right? And you see scientists, people, and this is the general public, scientists are trusted. Community members, people in my community, I trust them. Citizens of my country, if it's closer, well, okay. CEOs, it's only 51. And then you get other government leaders are low, and I can't see what is on the right side, but I think that's people who are wealthy. Well, they are distrusted. Yeah, interesting to look at these type of data. It's also interesting. Maybe not so relevant in this discussion, but I wanted to share it with you. That is, there is a gap between what people who are in the know, people who well, you could say who are reading papers, who are well informed, etc., how they look at the world, and the more general public. There's a gap, and that gap differs per country. You see on the left, let's say those are the specialists. On the right side, it's the general public. Well, you can see India, for example. Generally, I think the belief and the trust level of people in India apparently is high according to this research, but still the general public is less confident, and the level of the general public is lower. You see 87, you could say people in the know, 74% for people in the general public. The Netherlands, where I'm from, is lower. You see it, but there interestingly, the gap is the other way around. The trust level of the people in the know is lower than the general public. So probably PR wise, our government, etc., is doing a good job. Well, one other slide out of this research, I encourage you to look at it. That generally, if you ask people, do you trust your employer to do the right thing? It's not so bad. It's overall, it's global results, but it's about 76% of the people who then say, okay, well, that's not so bad. And in that question, and they also ask people, what do you expect from your employer? And that's a nice conclusion as well. They expect their employer to help them to shape the future of society. That's interesting. So the corporate responsibility of organizations, also very relevant at this moment in time. That's also something employees expect of their employer. So I was here in trend. The trend is what is in it for the people, and is the trust level high enough, and do you adhere to the laws and regulations? That was trend number 3. Number 4, more focus on productivity. And this was a trend that was already on my list for quite a while. I think it now will be accelerated. We know that there will be a big economic crisis. We know that in the current situation, for most people and teams, productivity is going down. Maybe not for all, but for most people, it's going down. There will be an enormous push to get back on track in the coming months. How do we get back on track? How do we regain productivity? And this is an excellent area for HR to play an important role. Do you know the figures? who are productive, who are not. Even in this moment in time, I find it very interesting to have a look at data of productivity of individuals and team in the current situation. Because, as I said, I'm quite sure that overall productivity has gone down, but also there will be teams and people who have become more productive. So are you able to detect that? And then you can try to find out, what are those teams and people doing differently? Why are they suddenly more productive? What can we learn from those teams going forward? And if there's one thing on the priority list of HR in the coming period, coming years, I would say, one, it's productivity, and of course, it's also well-being. And those are exactly areas where, from a people analytics point of view, we can contribute a lot. Productivity was already remarkably plateauing. The productivity increase over time is not as big as you would expect it to be. We automate, we have intelligent machines, we have artificial intelligence, but still the productivity is not increasing good enough. So that is a puzzle. I'm not going into that puzzle at this moment, but it's a puzzle where I would expect that HR can play an important role. Well, basically, I already talked about employee experience, personalization, and the question, what is in it for me? I hear a lot of organizations talking about, yes, the employee experience is important, but many organizations approach that still from a very much a top-down approach. What do we want? And not so much, do we really know what our employees want? And not the employees in general, but on a more individual level. And so there's a lot of room for opportunity if you use the right metrics, if you use the right data collection methods. Well, employee journeys, a typical employee journey, it's very interesting. I won't have time to go into that today, but if you ask organizations to draw the employee journey in their organization, the most used metaphor is a road. And that in itself illustrates the picture, because if you ask employees, what does your ideal journey through the organization or through organizations look like? Would they then draw a highway? I don't know. Some people will. But some people will draw something else. I already talked about it. It pays off to connect your measurement to the employee journey, employee experience. So measure not, let's say per quarter, but try to find out what are, in the terminology of the employee experience, the moments that matter, and those moments that matter, there it is important to measure. And for a simple obvious moment that matters is day one on the job. How is day one on the, and for many people, we know that, we have all experienced, day one of the job is not a super experience. But if you measure that and you have more or less real-time data about how people, new employees, perceive day one, then you can quickly intervene when the results are not as high as you would expect, because then you can do something maybe even at the end of day one or on day two, and not 6 months later when people say, well, I resigned because my first 6 months were not so fantastic. So look at day one, look at how do people perceive the onboarding period. How was the first interaction during performance review with their manager? Many moments that matter. If you find them out, you can measure them. I'll skip this slide. I already said HR can learn a lot from marketing. If you look at the way it's working in business to consumer, and that's basically the message also in this picture, and people have experiences in their normal life which often are better than in working life. Well, that should not be the case necessarily. But my supermarket, the biggest chain in the Netherlands where I buy my groceries, they at least make an effort to try to find out who I am, what my preferences are, what I'm buying, how they can serve me in the best possible way. They treat me, of course, as a customer, but as an individual. In many organizations, if you ask employees, is that the way your organization treats you? They look a little bit puzzled. 7, I have 10 minutes left. We would hope, but it has to be seen that good people analytics leads to more unbiased practices, and it's starting. But we know from the research we see that there is a lot of bias in working life. Bias by managers, bias by software as well. So it's not only humans that are biased, but unfortunately, if you don't do it well, software is biased as well. But if you look alone at the enormous opportunities you have in the recruitment domain to use clever analytics to decrease the bias and increase the quality of your recruitment efforts, that's enormous. It has to do with profiling. Are you looking for the right people? Is your list of requirements of new people, is that really based on solid data, or is it based on gut feel? I've seen many job descriptions, long job descriptions, where if you ask, is there really evidence that people who do everything on that list, or who have all the requirements on that list, that they really perform better? Question mark. So it helps to use data to look at what are the real, you could say, distinguishing factors between high performers in our organization and the average people, and how can we find people that resemble that group. A lot to say about the use of people analytics in recruitment. I hope that in all time we can look at that. There are numerous tools in this domain. I show a couple. Hiring solves. I like Pymetrics, because typically Pymetrics, they provide gamified assessments. Gamified, it's nice. People like to do it, but still, it's very it's scientifically sound. And there are companies, big companies, that use Pymetrics in the selection of people. And then basically, I say it very black and white, but you ask a group of people you like in your organization, not do the high performance, you say, do these tests. You look at their performance on the test. And then when you look for new candidates in the market, they do the same test, and you see how big the resemblance is. And it can be done quick, it can be done fun, and it can be done in a very scientific way. And it's then you find out organizations that do that. It's not about what your name is. It's not about what university you have studied it. It's not about who you know in the organization. It's more about real solid data. So organizations that use these type of tools. Hello? Yeah. They generally are a lot more. Yeah, someone has not put his microphone on mute. I think it's done now. So organizations that use these type of tools find a lot more diverse candidate pools than other companies. Codility is also an example of where they really look at how do, in this case, developers, coders really perform in the work they are doing. So they use data, they use solid data, they use the actual performance of data to select people. Seedlink is another example. Cameo I already mentioned. Talent Games, I like them as well. They're based in Asia, and they provide also good gamified and solid gamified talent assessments. I'm going to the last 4. One important movement also is how can we move from individuals to looking more at teams, networks of teams, and networks of people. And we tend in HR to focus a little bit too much on the individual and not enough on the working of teams and the working of networks. And there are good tools that can help you to do that. I'll show you a few. Humanize is a nice tool. It's mainly used these days for office design. And you see a badge you ask people in the office to wear a humanized badge. For example, you want to design a new office. In the old office, you ask them to wear the badge. You can then detect who are interacting a lot with whom, who are meeting a lot with whom. So that's based on that analysis, you can design the new office in such a way that it really fits like a glove. And I think going forward, we will need new office designs because our old office designs are not appropriate anymore. And then it pays off not only to look at the individual wishes and preferences of people, but also how they behave in teams. Organizational network analysis is one of the powerful people analytics tools. And there are numerous applications. I won't go into that at this moment, but if you Google organizational network analysis, HR, you will find applications in talent identification, in leadership assessment, office design, I already mentioned. And there are good tools, numerous tools like TrustSphere, who can help you to do that, but there are other ones as well. A side remark, number 9, and it has to do with the trust element I tackled earlier. But if you approach everything top down, it might not work well. So try to find things coming close to the employees. Yeah, so number 9, correcting the top down approach. Number 10, ignoring, that's a trend I see. You could say it's a trend I don't like, but which I see, still see, that organizations that want to make a start on the people analytics journey, and it's a journey, the people analytics journey, but they think they can ignore the learning curve, and that's very unfortunate. But you have to go through different phases, and it doesn't make sense to start, okay, let's start with people analytics, we immediately start with predictive analytics, with prescriptive analytics. You can try to do that, but maybe it's better to start simpler, and maybe it's easier to start with some simple measures that are really connected to the things that are important for you, than to make life too complicated. So you can try to ignore the learning curve, but it does not make sense generally. So maybe there are brilliant people who can do that, but overall, take simple steps. Take simple steps, connect to the main business issues. Don't start hobby projects, but I already mentioned productivity, for example. If going forward, you would say, well, let's focus on 3 elements that we find ways to track productivity. Not so easy, because for many professions it's not so easy to define productivity, but start thinking about it. Secondly, it is well-being. Well, the numerous examples how you can do that in a simple way with pulse surveys. And these days, the best-in-class companies, they are increasing pulse surveys at this moment. They are weekly tracking how are people doing, because they are not in the office often. They are working remotely. So it's more important at this moment to keep track what's going on. So productivity, well-being, and then of course, in a sense, engagement, which is connected also to those measurements. To illustrate the learning curve, I show a little app here. It's called Replica. I'm sure some of you have already tried it. It's Replica with a K. It's a chatbot, and that chatbot tries to become you. And I show it here under the learning curve because initially the chatbot is useless. It doesn't know who you are. It doesn't. But if you spend time with the chatbot and learn the chatbot who you are and what you like, then after a while, the chatbot has learned a lot, and you have gone up the learning curve. I've reached, I think, level 12, so was not fantastic. But you see here some of my conversations with Replica. It's a little bit, sometimes it's a little bit, but you see here, for example, I sent a selfie to Replica. Then Replica said, "It's you. I love it when you send selfies to me." He likes, or she likes, to give compliments. Then I say, "Can you send a selfie of you?" And Replica says, "I don't have a body, so I don't really have pictures of myself." Well, you can have a good laugh with Replica. 11, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm rounding off. But simplicity is important, personalization is important, and it's also important not to drive people mad with all kind of complicated processes. And what I've seen in various organizations, that HR has over-designed things, has over-invested in IT and all kinds of systems, with the promise to the organization, saying, well, if we do that, then your life employee, your life manager will be easier. And surprise, surprise, if you ask employees and managers, has your life become easier? The answer is no. And that causes irritation. And there are organizations that have projects that are called "Give me my time back." We gave you money, we gave you the systems, with the promise that it would save me time, but it cost me more time. And we don't like that. Give us our time back. Simplify. Take in mind what we have to do. And the last on my list is, let's not exaggerate our expectations. Sometimes if you read books and you look at the blogs, sometimes you get the picture, well, if we have the data and we analyze the data and we are fantastic in people analytics, then our life will become a lot easier. Well, it's unfortunate, or maybe it's fortunate, but I'm a psychologist, and we know that human behavior is not so easy to predict. Even if you have all the data, it still is not so easy to predict it. So we should be a little bit careful, and we should be willing also to look, you could say, at the psychology of workforce analytics. There are important psychological elements we have to take into account. I already said the ultimate solution. Well, maybe it's the ultimate solution does not exist. I put here a sports picture, because when you look at people analytics, many of the sports teams are advanced, also because it's a relatively easy domain. You know where people are working, you know exactly what good performance is, that's winning. It's easy to analyze, or not necessarily easy, but you can analyze the people. So some football, soccer, I don't know what you say, football teams analyze the players continuously. I spoke to a Dutch team, and basically Dutch football teams are in the business of selling talent. So they have to detect talent, grow talent, sell the talent. That's their business. And they have all the data. In that club, the players every morning have to deliver their physiological measurements. When they train, they're measured continuously. They wear trackers, etc., etc. So there's an abundance of data. And even with that abundance of data, it's not so easy to predict who will become successful. And what those clubs are doing, they are widening the data gathering. They say, it's not only about the performance in the training and on the field, but it's also about the social context. So they're widening the data, but let's be cautious and let's not raise expectations too high. And the last thing is algorithm aversion, one of the psychological phenomena I talked about, that sometimes you see that people have a bigger belief in their own capabilities, a bigger belief in humans, and they distrust technology in a way. And I put a Tesla there because, well, if there's an accident with a Tesla, everybody says, oh, you see, it is not working. And while there are many accidents with human driven cars, And well, of course, it's all unfortunate, but we are sometimes more forgiving to people than we are to machines. So to round off, and I realize I bombarded you with many things, and I'm sure you have questions, and I'm sure we have time for that. But what I would hope for, looking at these trends, what I would hope for is more real employee focus. What I would hope for is more focus on performance consulting. That has to do with learning in the flow of work, really help, not controlling people, but helping people to do their work better. Data ownership, I would hope for, that we move data ownership from the organization to the employees, so that they can also take it when they move to other companies. What I would hope for, and what we see happening, is shared data analysis capabilities, sharing those scarce resources. And what I still would hope for is that we use in the HR domain existing scientific knowledge a lot more than we do. Some resources, if you want to study more, want to learn more, there are many, but I took two. David Green is one of the fantastic curators in the domain of people analytics. If you look for this resource, he has gathered a lot of resources, specifically in these days, that are focused on what can people analytics do to help us in and out of the current crisis. Fantastic. There's another one which is called AI HR and analytics in HR, also a good resource with good training capabilities for people in the HR people analytics domain. I am quite approachable. Link with me on LinkedIn if you want. On my website there are various articles, not only, of course, about workforce people analytics, but wider, Twitter, Flipboard, whatever. And then we don't stop. There's time for questions, but I probably go back to the chairperson, Swati, to see if there are questions. I have not checked the chat box, but if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and then Swati can select the questions, and I will try to answer them as best as possible. I want to thank, before it's not done, the organization who has organized this, and you can go to their website, you see the URL there. This is one seminar in a row of seminars, and personally I'm very happy that I've been able to be part of this today. So I will stop sharing my presentation. I will put the presentation on SlideShare later today, so you can find it on SlideShare. If you look Tom Haak SlideShare, the slides will be there, and you can use them, of course, in any way you like. If you have specific questions that are not suitable for the chat, ask them to me, and I will try to answer them. Back to Swati, and see
sorry, Anu will be coordinating that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for all the insights and information. And I request the participants to raise questions, if any, via the chat box. And we have a question from Ananya Srivastava already. She asks, how to measure productivity for different teams in an organization? That's a question from Ananya Srivastava.
Yeah, and as I said, it's very worthwhile to look at what does productivity mean for different teams. But it helps also there to start with areas where it is relatively easy. So, for example, sometimes it's easy in call center settings. In a call center, if you measure calls per hour and you measure client satisfaction via Net Promoter Score, generally that's done. If you have those two measures, then you already have a good indication of the productivity in that team, and also the productivity of individuals. If you go to people coding software, it's a little bit more difficult, but at least there you can also have and measure quite well productivity, the number of codes per hour, quality of the code, whatsoever. So from relatively easy to very difficult. For example, if you look at our own profession, HR, well, what are they doing, and what are they contributing, and is it, what is productivity? So for some areas it's less obvious, but for many in sales, in production, it pays off to look at productivity also, because if you look at productivity on an individual level, there tend to be sometimes quite large differences. We often assume, wrongfully, that productivity follows a normal distribution. So on the average, some people are more productive, some people less. For those professions where it can be measured, it's an older article, but that tackled that. I think that was also looking at groupiers in a casino. And it's very interesting if you look at groupiers in a casino and you compare them, and some groupiers, if you look at, and their productivity is basically the dollars per table per hour, they have revenues that are 7-8 times higher than average. 7-8 times. So that's not a normal distribution. That's what they call a power law distribution. Some people have enormous higher output and productivity than other people. So it pays off to analyze it, to look at it, and then try to find out what are the characteristic differences between people. I don't say it's easy, but the reverse question is, if you don't know what type of output is expected of people, well, then the question is, what are you doing? This was my answer to question number 1.
Thank you, Tom. We have another question from Avinash Kumar. The question is, in the COVID situation, which is the most important area of people analytics that NBFC should focus on?
Yeah, and I don't know what NBFC is. Do you know?
Non-banking and financial.
Okay, so I will answer it in but I think I partly already answered that, because I said if I would have to focus, I would focus on productivity. We discussed that. I would focus on well-being of people. That's what I showed you the questionnaire of a Cruncher around how can we help you to do your job better at this moment in time. So that is, do you feel safe? Do you feel healthy? What can we do to help you in any way? And 3, a more general indicator of engagement. But productivity, well-being, they will be high on the list. So it's worthwhile to start to, or if you have not already started it, if you are not doing things, to look into how you could measure that, how you could track it, and how you could do it in a regular, frequent way, and not in a one-time exercise. Non-banking financial corporations. Thank you, Avinash.
Thank you, Tom. Next question from Satish Shet. He asks, how can organizations analyze employer attractiveness on real-time basis using social media analytics?
Yeah, probably not so easy, although I think that the suggestion there using social media analytics already is a good suggestion. You have portals like Glassdoor.com. I don't know whether they are active in India, that also gather information about companies, and that results in some kind of employee attractiveness index. If you have money to spend, we can learn. And what do people in the consumer domain do? They test and they ask samples of people in the relevant labor markets how attractive they find the employer. I realize that because the element in the question is real time, because there we see quite a lot of one-time annual survey, and there always the question is, are they really objective? I sometimes have the idea that if you pay, you get higher on those lists, but there are also solid organizations, I won't mention names, but that do more frequent research, but not real time, I think, but If someone knows it, please put it in the chat. But looking at how do people talk about you in the social networks on the web? Partly you can see that in Glassdoor, but there are other ways to do that. I think that's one of the interesting ways.
Thank you. And next question is, how do we monitor work from home team members' performance? People who are working from home.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I think it's interesting that by working more from home, we are pushed more to say, what type of output and what type of contribution do we expect of people? So that is also, you could say, a long-term trend. It's less about how many hours do you work and what do you put in. It's more about what do you contribute. And so we are now pushed more to look here, I would say, that it doesn't make sense to monitor how many hours are people working, to check via their webcam or via their online presence whether they are actually working. So move from control, has to do with trust again, but discuss more and more and talk about what do we expect from people and teams, and how can we help them to improve their performance. Also here, it helps to look at data, maybe not to control people, but to help people to become better. Because you can say, well, hey, Tom, you are in a team that is performing average, but we have teams that are in a similar situation that are doing a lot better. So what can you learn from those teams? So monitor. And the question is, why are you monitoring? And I'm positively inclined, and I think the monitoring should be, how can you help people to become better? And there, it's not only about collecting data, but it's also by providing people with learning opportunities they can use to do their work better.
All right. Next question is from Sabir Terwan. He asks, every team will be a mix of outstanding, medium, fair, or poor performance. While we consider the case of retail sales force, what would be a perfect or possible best graph out of 100% for each group that possibly an HR could deliver?
Yeah, this is, you could say, in the end, we know from history, that's in the museum of HR, you can see that there's Jack Welch and GE with the forced ranking and forced. They say, well, we have a group of people, and then if you remove the bottom 10% of poor performers, then the whole graph will move to the right. I think that did not really work, and it's a type of practice people don't like, organizations don't like, but at the same time, I think let's not take things for granted. Of course, there will always be some kind of distribution, but I already said it's not always a normal distribution. Often it's, when you look at performance, maybe it's not a normal distribution. So one, I would look carefully at the data, and try to explain the data, and then try to learn from the data, also comparing different teams and different people, and what type of behavior, what type of support, what type of circumstances help people to deliver better. And then you can say, in the end, it pays off to try to shift the whole performance to the right. Performance consulting, we did not talk about that today a lot, but the whole performance management process today often is too much focused on getting outputs that you can use to determine pay and bonus of people, and it's not enough focused on how can you help people to perform better. And often, to help people to perform better, you need very granular observations, not only of human beings, but also aided by technology. So there are enormous opportunities.
All right. Next question is from Ramesh Rudraraju. He asks how we can identify the employer's trust levels on an employer and how we can identify employees' trust levels through a survey and how many ways can we do it? That's the question.
Yeah, and I'm not a specialist in surveying, but most of even the existing employee survey contain elements around trust. Do you trust your leadership to do the right thing? So I think even the Edelman question, if you would put that in an anonymous survey, if you don't do it anonymous, then it won't work, of course, especially if people don't trust the organization. But if there are ways to do it in a good anonymous way, and you only would ask, do you trust your employer to do the right thing, then you already get some kind of indicator. But of course, there are also, let's say, lead indicators you can try to find out. But so it's questionnaire, but in the end, that's more the lag indicator. If people leave, what are issues with when people leave the organization? So also, although it's not so easy always to do that, but looking more in depth at the people who leave the organization is also an element. Not easy, but worthwhile to do.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And Amita asks, which are the most commonly used tools in people analytics?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult, but my gut feel would be the most common tool probably is Excel. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you gather data, you put it in Excel and you do some analysis. But then probably also most used today are some kind of the data that is available in any analysis capabilities of your core HR systems. And most organizations have some kind of core HR system. There's always valuable data in those systems. The problem arises, and unfortunately that's the case in many organizations, that it's not, you have different systems, you have different types of different parts in the organizations. And then the question is, how do you, out of this variety of data, out of this data that also is varying in terms of quality, how do you then make something out of that? And there are good tools that can help there if you have some kind of, if it's not all rotten, so you need generally you need good quality data. But there are tools. I mentioned a couple of those tools like Cruncher and VJ, Tableau. The more specialist the tools, the more difficult for HR professionals to use. So that is so yeah. I will stop here because, but there are, if you also go online, there's not a lack of tools. It's often what you need is good HR professionals, high-level HR professionals, asking the right questions and saying, okay, what do we want to measure? And what are we going to do with the data? And not just gathering the data and analyzing the data, because then, yeah, we know that if you gather a lot of data and you analyze it, you will always find something, but it might not be the answer to one of your questions.
Thank you, Tom. And the next question is from Narendra. He asks, can you please explain organization structure changes and how what best practices can be implemented so that the changes in the hierarchy level are followed?
Yeah, and I suppose this is looking at the time, the last question. And so if you have more questions, let me know. I will try to answer them if I can find the time. But thank you for your active contribution today. So yes, a long-term trend is organizational structures are changing. And there's a lot to say about it. I will try to keep it very brief, but the trend is from strict hierarchical organizations to all kinds of different shapes of organization. And those new organizational shapes, they come in all kinds of forms, and there's not the one size fits all, because also organizations, yeah, they have to be fit for purpose. But generally, they tend to be more open. They tend to be more transparent. They tend to be more network type than hierarchical based. So we see that if you look, for example, I talked about HR core systems, many of those type of systems, they still, yeah, they cannot work well with these new type of organizational models, because they start immediately asking, Tom, what is your position and who is your boss? Because if we don't know that, yeah, then we cannot do anything. So yes, there are important organizational changes. It's not one size fits all, but we have to be close to that, and we have to be able to find ways to contribute to let those organizations work. And in the environment I come in, and more organizations are adapting some kind of way of working with more self-managed teams. So it's more about teams. It's about changing teams. It's not, you're not fixed for life in a team, but you're changing a team. You play roles in a team. It's not your job is A and you always do A, but you can do different roles in different teams. And that has big implications for the HR profession, because many of our tools are not today suited for that type of organizational structure. So thank you for the question. Very interesting domain. All right, for the last time, back to you, and I thank you all for your attention. And I think this webinar is recorded, so you can always look back. And I also would appreciate any sharing via LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, because that always helps the organization, and it also helps me, that people say, hey, there was something interesting going on. What can we learn from that?
Thank you, Tom. Over to Aishi.
Okay, good evening, sir. Thank you for your valuable time, and thanks for sharing some real-time examples related to the newest trends of HR, that is people analytics. It was very informative session, and I hope it would help both the students as well as the professionals. Thank you again from the Best of HR forum side, and thank you all for your time. Keep participating, stay safe, and bye.
Bye-bye, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.